Hello! Today I'm here to talk to you about the audiobooks that I listened to in the month of July. Admittedly, I didn't listen to that many audiobooks this month, but I still have 3 to talk to you about, so let's get started. First, I listened to Somebody I Used to Know, which is by Wendy Mitchell and is narrated by Rachel Atkins. This is a non-fiction book written by Wendy Mitchell, who has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's at the early age, I think, of 58, I might be wrong. But basically it looks at her diagnosis and her first symptoms, and then we follow how she deals with the diagnosis and how she copes with keeping her life together. Wendy Mitchell has since become quite a prominent figure in sort of speaking about Alzheimer's and spreading awareness of Alzheimer's, but this book is so fantastic. I think the first thing to note is that the fact that she has managed to write a book which is actually really fantastically written. There's no mistakes. It's not, admittedly, it does start to repeat a little bit towards the end. You kind of hear the same thing. So I think it could have been cut slightly, but I don't think that's a reflection on Wendy's ability due to her diagnosis. But in general, this book is fantastically written. If I am correct in assuming this from the information on the audiobook, there was help. She did get help writing it, which is completely understandable, but on the whole I think this is Wendy's words. This is her putting the book together. I think a lot of the time, and Wendy says this herself, when we think about Alzheimer's and dementia, we kind of assume that it's old elderly people who are no longer capable of really doing anything, but like she was saying, when she was first diagnosed she was 58 and very young. She was very active. She had quite a high up job in the NHS, and she really struggled to find stories of people like her, people who were still quite young and were still at work and functioning, and suddenly having to cope with the knowledge that you are going to decline, you are going to lose your faculties, and it kind of, it's devastating because I think it brings home an issue that a lot of people like to put to the side, and it really makes you wake up and sit up and take notice. And Wendy finds her own ways of coping with things. She does in the end have to stop working, but she finds ways to leave herself notes and to remember things. Every now and again she does have a sort of episode where, for instance, she'll be typing something and suddenly the words will make no sense to her. On the whole, she has managed to keep her life quite functional. I think as well it's really interesting with her being somebody who worked for the NHS, and when she comes to tell her boss, you know, she assumes that working for the NHS they'll be quite up on dealing with colleagues who have health issues, and actually the only thing that her employers can tell her is that she would be best off taking her retirement early, and I think that's really a devastating blow for a woman who has focused her life around her work, has built her career up and gotten, I think, to a managerial role in her position. And as she says, you know, how are other people coping when somebody who works high up in the NHS is being told that, you know? So I think she basically just campaigns for change, and this is a fantastic read. I would highly recommend. I would also say that the audiobook was really fantastic. Rachel Atkins did a really good job. I think sometimes with a book like this it's quite difficult if the person narrating it isn't the person who wrote it, because obviously it's all in first person, it's very personal, but actually Rachel Atkins really manages to strike that balance of the personal and also really capturing, I think, Wendy's personality. So I would recommend listening to it if you get the chance. Then I listened to You by Caroline Kepnes. This was narrated by Santino Fontana. This I thoroughly enjoyed and I really didn't expect to. So this is a thriller book that was kind of around quite a few years ago, and I think I recall it being compared to books like Gone Girl and Girl on the Train, and those kind of things aren't really my cup of tea. Plot heavy thrillers, they're not really something that I gravitate towards, and actually I had real issues with Gone Girl, because I won't even go into that now, but anyway, so I've avoided it. But when I saw it on Daily Deals I thought I would give it a go, and I thought it would be quite a good one to listen to, and I was right. But actually I would say that to categorise this as your typical thriller would be to do it a major disservice, because there is so much more to this book than just the thriller aspect. What I actually thought throughout the listening experience of this is that it reminded me so much of American Psycho, but I didn't necessarily get along with American Psycho. I felt like it kind of, I could see what it was trying to do, but it didn't grip me. It didn't get me emotionally involved, which I think is all part of American Psycho. You know, it's at a distance, it's removed, and that is the whole point of it. But I kind of wanted to be more in the story. I wanted it to have more meat for me, and this book absolutely has that. But in terms of the narrative voice, it's so much like American Psycho. Anyway, so this is about a man who works in a bookshop, and he meets a woman who comes into that bookshop. And he develops an obsession with her. He starts stalking her. He watches her outside her window. He basically contrives situations where they will meet, and then he contrives a relationship effectively. What I thought was really fantastic about this, and it had that kind of psychopath element to it, but because I think the man's called Joe, I can't check because I don't have the physical book, I'm pretty sure he's called Joe, but because Joe is it's so normal to him what he's doing, he doesn't necessarily see that his behaviour is odd. If she does something to annoy him, it's her fault. He genuinely feels wounded and like she's done something against him, even though he might have, say, found out that she had done something against him by reading her email. And effectively, this becomes a bit of a social commentary about sort of the upper classes in America. Rich college kids who don't really have anything to worry about, develop their own neuroses and have really strange priorities. There's also a load of references to various literature in here, so I think anybody who loves books will enjoy some aspect of this. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was so much better crafted than I was expecting. As I say, it is much more of a social commentary in the style of American Psycho than it is, I would say, a typical thriller, and it's fantastic. And I think it's really weird because by the end of it you're completely rooting for Joe, and you kind of like him even though he's done these awful things, because he's told you about the awful things he has done in such a casual way. I would highly recommend this. I would say I would recommend listening to it. I don't know if I would have had quite the same enjoyment of it if I had read it, because the voice, the narrator, Santino Fontana, manages to develop a really realistic and believable voice, and he really adds something to the character, I feel, which kind of contributed, I think, to the emotional investment. Oh, it was just fantastic. I finished with A Street Cat Named Bob. This is by James Bowen and it's narrated by Chris Milnes. This is a book that I'm sure a lot of people have seen around. It's about a street cat named Bob, effectively. It's James Bowen's real life account of his experience with his cat Bob when they are both on the streets. Admittedly, I had issues with this in the narration. I wouldn't recommend listening to this actually, because I found Chris Milnes was trying to capture that personality that I spoke about before. He was trying to add kind of a light-hearted, personable touch to it, but it ended up just being cheesy. He was kind of laughing along, and it ended up being not believable for me, and it was really quite jolting along the way. I really didn't enjoy the narration itself. The story is really quite sweet. We join him when he is in a rehab program to come off of heroin, and he's living in a supported accommodation basically, and in his supported housing there is a cat, and he has an instant connection with this cat, but he's kind of not sure where it's come from. He asks around and it turns out that nobody really knows whose it is, so he takes it in temporarily. He gets it checked over by the vet and neutered and sorted out and everything, and then he sort of says to it, you can go on your way. But Bob has a very special connection to James. He starts following him out when he goes busking, and ultimately they become a real pair and a sort of an icon on London streets. A lot of people know them, and a lot of people start giving him money for Bob and buying Bob things, and if you search Bob the Street Cat on YouTube, there are a lot of videos showing the pair of them. It's a really sweet story, just about the way that I think having something to care for can really turn your life around, because though James is already trying to turn his life around when he meets Bob, once he meets Bob he makes an effort to come off the rehabilitation program that he's on, and to really improve his situation he stops busking illegally and starts working for the Big Issue. I would say as well, this is a fantastic look at the Big Issue and how fantastic a charity it is and what it does for people who really have no other hope. I think it's also a really heartbreaking look at life on the streets and the reality of life on the streets, because James does go into that. One thing I would say, I think James does do something that a lot of people probably do when writing books about their lives, which is to paint himself in a very good light. So sometimes he's in trouble with the police and the other people on the street, and he does kind of brush over things that he might not have done as he should have done. But ultimately, I think this is just a really heartwarming read. As I say, I wouldn't recommend listening to it, sadly. I think if you bought the physical book, it's just a nice, uplifting little book, and it's quite a sweet story. So those are all the audiobooks I listened to in July. Please let me know down below if you've been listening to anything good, and I will see you next time. Bye!